Welcome to Unit 10 of EDSE 512. This unit is a 2-week unit, so we will have time to work on the assignments. You'll see that the major focus for the unit work-wise is case study part 3. This is one of the largest or most intensive comprehensive assignments within the course, so please do plan ahead. It may take some more time than the other critiques and smaller assignments that you've been doing. You will be writing an IEP here based on the information you've been given for case study part 3, and we'll talk through that more in this video. There is also a discussion for us in this unit. So we've been away from discussions for several units working on critiques, and now we're going to go back to that platform. We will look at the discussion. It is related to the draft of your Part 3 submission, and you'll be able to receive some peer review and feedback. Again, for this 2-week unit, the procedural manual will be reading material for us, and we'll focus on implementation of IEP or the development of one, along with the IEP meeting itself, talking about some proactive strategies and conflict resolution options. You will take note also on this course schedule that the initial discussion response is not due until just a couple days before the end of the unit. The reason for this is because the initial discussion response will require a draft submission of your case study part 3 assignment. So we want to make sure you have plenty of time to work on that. But the downside is it does leave you a short time, just a couple of days, to finish your responses to your peers by 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on the final evening of this unit. So do plan ahead on that. It's fine to post earlier. That's always beneficial. It gives people more time to review, but you'll see the deadline is indicated here in italics for Unit 10. And in the graphic organizer, as always, we're looking at the main ideas, but the two things that you'll need to be working on for credit for this unit will be the discussion board and the case study part 3. Our Unit 10 lecture, this does have many different slides, so we won't go through each of them, but one really important part that I wanted to hit on, especially with some questions that I received based on the IEP critique that we just wrapped up, is the concept of percentage time in general education as part of the least restrictive environment section. So generally, for students who are in the public school setting, you'll see 40% to 79% of the time as one option, 80% of the time or more as another option, so that would be designated as at least 80. And then finally, a more restrictive setting you might see would be general education less than 40% of the time. So we'll talk about kind of those 1, 2, and 3 levels when it comes to a restrictive environment or percent of time within general education. The value of inclusion, obviously we want to be as inclusive as possible, but each student is different and we have to evaluate needs, and then needs will drive goals, which will drive services, and services often are related to the percentage of time in general education and the least restrictive environment determination. And you may have a student who's not in a traditional neighborhood or public school setting at all. You may have a student who's in a separate school, and that could be a self-contained school. For instance, you might see these for students with affective needs or serious emotional disabilities, those who have a smaller setting that is more supportive and more controlled and doesn't have as many of the variables that might cause issues, such as, for instance, at the high school level, an open campus, assemblies, etc. So you might see a smaller separate school setting that is within the school district, but is provided for students only with a certain level of need who require a certain level of support. They may have much more staffing when it comes to mental health time and a more clear crisis intervention plan that can be more controlled in a smaller facility, etc. So that could be a safety-related placement or just based upon the level of need for that student. And then, of course, there are students who perhaps are placed out of district. So you may be in the future teaching in a setting like that, but those could also be options under least restrictive environment. However, for a student within that traditional neighborhood school setting, we're looking at less than 40 to 79, or 80% of the time at least within general education. And remember that placement within general education can be with a paraeducator or educational assistant present. It also can be with a special education teacher doing services that are direct inside within that general education classroom. That might be a team taught or co-taught model, which can be very effective, where a class taught by a general education teacher has a special education teacher or learning specialist present for support to provide some service minutes to students during that time while they're still receiving gen ed content from gen ed teachers and have options for a variety of peer contacts within their class. So there are lots of creative ways to program. We want to make sure that our sites are offering as much as possible in the least restrictive environment for students at all times, remembering that 80 and above is not the least restrictive environment for everybody. So for some, the needs and the services and the present levels and the results of the most recent evaluation may indicate that a lower percentage than 80 is required for the student to receive their free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, and that's okay. So we really need to go a case-by-case basis with this. And I hope that that helps to clear up the percentage component that was addressed in the critique. By the way, in that critique IEP also, the percentages were not consistent across the document, and that was part of the problem with the IEP. That's why we're critiquing it. It's an issue, an error, or an inconsistency within the document. So as we move forward in Unit 10, we do have resources and information regarding collaboration with parents and families. And especially if you're approaching a meeting where you might foresee some conflict, perhaps there's an advocate involved, or parents are significantly concerned, this input is quite valuable. But really, even if that's not the case, the parent or guardian input is still key. They are the experts on the child, and they have the child in settings that will never see the child. So that information provided strengths, interests, and needs, their thoughts and feelings about the school setting and the progress that's being made is valuable and is welcomed by us. And by taking that collaborative approach and providing questions or conversations to them beforehand in a setting that is, monitored by multiple school staff, oftentimes a conference phone call or a video call can be valuable for this, or even just in writing an email requesting some more information, feedback, and input before the meeting. It can also reduce the complexity or the length of time that a meeting takes if a parent or guardian has had the opportunity to express thoughts, feelings, and concerns and provide input beforehand, so that the team is more prepared to discuss and everybody's on the same page. So you don't have to use these exact forms, obviously, but they do give you some ideas. You can build from there or just reach out conversationally. It just depends upon the family. And obviously, after the IEP meeting is done, the parent will review any adjustments or changes made within the draft. You want to get that draft to them with plenty of time beforehand for their review. And then once you've come to a consensus on the final copy of the draft, you will finalize and get that finalized IEP to the parent or guardians as soon as possible once it is done and ready to go, so that they have that on record. That's also the case with any other documents that might go along with the IEP, such as the BIP. So there's also some information here regarding collaboration with the general education teacher. Teacher feedback is essential for the IEP process to make sure that we're getting the appropriate feedback. And we don't have every gen ed teacher present within the meeting. Typically, there's only one. So we do want to hear from all of them. So you can share with them a form. There are some examples here. You have to get them the IEP snapshot right away as soon as the IEP is finalized, and that snapshot will be provided to you within the program that you're using. It is a summary of accommodations, modifications, the eligibility categories, and the goals. So it's not the whole IEP, but it gives the overview so that all the general education teachers are on the same page about what the students need. We also, in this module, will address the concept of a facilitated IEP. So this is an option that can help with preventing or resolving conflict if it is occurring in the IEP meeting setting. The concept of having a neutral facilitator. So as we scroll down, we'll see this tiered approach. And down here at the bottom, obviously, there are some norms and practices that we can put into place, even if the case manager is just facilitating that IEP, that can help, such as the concept of a parking lot where questions and concerns can be be set aside for a designated time for discussion, and that can be done visually with a chart. We can provide an agenda, create some norms before the meeting. For instance, what kind of verbal or nonverbals will be required to say that there's consensus on a particular topic, or how we'll address questions as they arise, etc. So that would just be best practice in general down there at the bottom. But for more intensive support, we might have a facilitator come in from a different school and help to run through that agenda and to dictate the order of events within the meeting, and to provide that collaborative or neutral, rather uninvolved party, that approach of somebody coming in from the outside to reduce some of that tension and to organize things a little bit. And then finally, the school could hire an outside facilitator, somebody who is not from the district, to come to the school and facilitate the meeting. So that's an option if things are escalating further. Obviously, we want to start with those best practices at the bottom of the continuum, or this tier model, and make sure that everybody is providing those norms and remaining collaborative so that we don't even need to get to that point. This unit also provides information regarding a student-led IEP meeting. At the highest level of this, the student is running the entire IEP meeting, which is amazing. Obviously, we know that this will not be appropriate or reasonable or realistic for all students at all times. So that's why we have a continuum here. Obviously, we want student involvement and input as much as possible at any age, but particularly when legally required, the student has to be invited, and it's strongly encouraged that the student attends for at least part of the meeting, if not all. So you'll see there's a whole continuum here. Right in the middle, the student is present and actively participating, providing contributions in their own way. But then further, we can give responsibility for one piece, for instance, the discussion of accommodations, and further as you go up to full responsibility for the IEP. So again, an amazing concept. There are several resources about that listed here related to self-determination as a student grows older and prepares for post-secondary living. As mentioned, it's not appropriate for everybody, so we take that into consideration, but it's good to consider how that model might be adapted to meet the needs and the goals of any student. More resources and information regarding student-led IEPs, and another article for you here to review about things that should not be said or heard at an IEP meeting and what should be done differently. Additional information, a video regarding best practices, do's and don'ts. These are good to review. Some of them kind of have a funny approach. Here's another article, just resources for us to keep our eyes on as we go and consider collaborative approach in the IEP. So here is our Unit 10 discussion, and you'll see as we discuss the deadline, you will need to work ahead. You will upload the IEP document for your initial post, and that is for your Unit 10 project, the IEP review project that you'll be working on. And we'll discuss that here in a moment. But for your responses, you're going to need to provide constructive feedback. So don't just say, oh, this is great, I really liked it. We want to get into detail and answer all 7 of these questions. And there is not a source citation required for this discussion in particular, but of course that citation always is welcome. Finally, here we have case study part 3, the IEP development. So this is your opportunity. If you've been frustrated and kind of irritated with some of the really subpar IEP components that we've had to review for critiques, and you said, oh, I could do that so much better, this is your chance to do it. So you will develop an IEP. In the modules, there are documents, critical documents provided to you. This is what the IEP form looks like. The Colorado IEP can also be found on the CDE website, but you're familiar with this now. It gives you boxes to answer each question. My biggest piece of advice as you complete this is read these little sections below. Read the red and of course the bold titles. So make sure that the information you're inputting in these areas answers the questions that are provided here. The document really guides you in how to best fill it out. So with the case study student that you have selected, you will develop the IEP. And you will complete the entire thing with the information that you've been given. Feel free to, as we've discussed with the case study, fill in gaps as needed. Take some creative license. Make sure that your document is comprehensive. You want baseline data in your present levels section. You will have 2 academic goals, and at least one of them requires 2 objectives that will go with it. So that's a good opportunity for you to practice that objective rating as well. Remember, they must all be measurable and observable. You all are familiar with that from our previous critique assignment on goal writing. And then there will be a separate document, 2 to 3 pages long, with a rationale explaining the reason for your goals selected, how they relate to the needs and strengths of the student, and additional goals that you would develop past those 2 academic goals. So you don't need to resubmit the forms that you've done before. You are working on these sections within this Colorado IEP document, however. So check the announcement for clarification on that as well. Look forward to working with you.